Hello students, today let us continue with the chapter Management of Resources. In this session we will be mainly discussing about conservation of forest and wildlife. Now, why are forests called biodiversity hotspots? Forests are called biodiversity hotspots because we can see a wide range of life. That means different types of living organisms are present. Bacteria, fungi, ferns, angiosperms, gymnosperms, nematodes, insects, and of course higher order organisms. Not only this, all the trophic levels of the food chain are present in a forest. Therefore, forest is rightly called biodiversity hotspot. Now, what is the need for conserving forest? Forests have to be conserved to preserve the biodiversity. And why should we conserve the biodiversity? This is to maintain the ecological balance. Now let us see who are the four stakeholders responsible for conservation of forest. The first are the tribals or the local people who are dependent on the forest for their livelihood and other aspects of life. Second is the forest department of the government who owns the land and who are also responsible for maintaining law and order in these areas. The third are the industrialists who obtain raw materials from the forest, such as the tendu leaves, which is used to make beedis. Now they just take the raw materials for their industries, but they are not dependent on the forest completely like the local people. And the fourth are naturalists or wildlife enthusiasts who would like to maintain the forest or conserve the forest in its pristine form. So once again I repeat, the four stakeholders are the local people or the tribals that live in and around the forest department of the government, the industrialists, and the wildlife enthusiasts. Next, let us see how the local people are dependent on the forest for their varied needs. They get timber and firewood from forest. Not only that, bamboo is used for making slats of huts and also baskets for gathering fruits and nuts. Apart from this, the tools for fishing, hunting and agriculture are made from the wood that is obtained from the forest. They gather fruits, nuts and medicines from the forest. Not only that, forests are grazing grounds for their animals. They get fodder for their animals from the forest. So you can see that the tribals or the local people, they are dependent on the forest in many aspects. Next, we have to see how this concept of conservation and protection has been implemented from the Vedic times. We have lot of proof for this. In the Upanishads, Smritis and the Vedas, there are various hymns that give us an idea of how this concept of protection and preservation of forest and wildlife was given a lot of importance. So this idea of protection and preservation or conservation of forest is not a new thing for the Indians. It was there in execution right from the beginning, from the time of the Vedas. This concept of preservation of and protection of forest is very well mentioned in the Vedas, and there are various hymns which are written to bring out this aspect. We also get hints about how agriculture started and the various aspects of post-Vedic period, that is about the cultural landscape, sacred groves, sacred forest, sacred corridors, etc. and many ethnoforestry techniques. These ethnoforestry techniques were induced from the cultural, traditional aspects of the people. And these ethnoforestry practices were imbibed into their life and they followed it in their day-to-day life. And thus, importance was given for protection and preservation of forests. Now let us see how the forest was managed before the British came to India, after the arrival of the British, and after their departure. What was the condition? Before the arrival of the British, the concept of preservation and protection and sustainable management of forests was followed. Though the resources were used, but they were used in a limited way, and never the forest was exploited. It was conserved and preserved well by the local people. Next is, when the British came, they were not bothered about conservation or preservation of the forest. They were only interested in getting raw materials. And the forests were thus completely destroyed and overexploited. And there was lot of loss in the biodiversity. And the forest depleted. Now, after the British left, all the lands went into the hands of the government or the forest department. But the local needs of the people, the local knowledge of the people, and the management of the areas by the local people, everything was ignored. And it was the government who took charge of the day-to-day affairs. The needs of the people and the local practices, everything was ignored. So it led to further degradation of the forest. Not only that, under the modern government, they focused on monocultures and plantations. So as a result, vast areas were cut down and replaced by plantations. And this was preferred by the industrialists and the local people. not the local people, the industrialists and the government, because it brought in revenue. Now, what was the bad effect of this monoculture or plantation? There was loss of biodiversity, and not only that, the varied needs of the local people could not be met because they were not getting medicine, fruits, nuts, timber, fuel wood, etc. Now, what was the difference in the mindset of the industrialists and the local people? The industrialists, they were not dependent on the forest for their day-to-day aspects. They only exploited the forest for raw materials, for their industries. So they were only interested in earning money. But that is not the case with the local people. For the local people, the forest is their livelihood. Not only that, they focus on sustainable development. Though they use the resources of the forest, they are always focusing on sustainable development. They never overexploit the forest for their personal gains. It is home for the local people. And not only that, it is a part of their cultural and social and traditional aspect. It is a religious tenet for them. Now, conservationists, they focused on only the conservation of large animals. But later on, they realized the need to conserve biodiversity as a whole, because then only the ecosystem can be preserved properly. With that, we have come to the end of today's session. Thank you.